Well, this is the screen you will find when you run gCADPlus for the very first time, and most of you would click on the File and New and just accept the default, and this puts you into the gCADPlus drawing editor. It has a black background, and when you click into that black background, which is called the drawing editor, the mouse pointer changes to a crosshair cursor, and you can actually change the size of the crosshair, but let's leave it at that for the moment. I can click in Draw and say draw a polygon, and let's put a 5-sided polygon, and I'll just pull out. You might like to use the distance command and just measure, say, from one side to the other. It's about a 5-meter polygon. If you've been working in the USA Imperial version and do the same sort of thing, the distance might read something like 5 or 6 decimal feet. So one shape is in, and if I wanted to play around a little with gCADPlus, and let's use the boundary command down here, and I'll just draw some sort of flexible shape, which might well be a lawn, and I come near the end and close it. Notice that each point where I clicked, it shows a handle on it, and that they're called vertices, and they're numbered 1, 2, 3 in the order that I clicked. So I'll unselect all now. So there's the boundary there. It's actually a polyline over here in the settings box. Tells you it's a polyline. Let's imagine that it is a lawn. You would want to select the boundary and just apply some curve fitting to it. So let's call it a B-spline curve. That means that you can tweak things by moving the vertices around to get the sort of shape that you're after. If you then want to put some patterning in there, some hatching to indicate lawn, well, you would go Draw, come down to the Hatch command. You could type it, and then this box will pop up, and there are 3 different files showing, one called acad, one called acad.iso, and one called gCADiso. These are hatch pattern files, and they were first developed by AutoCAD. And what I'll now do, before we load one of these, before we select one and load it, I just want to show you the file format of these, and we're going to look at acad.pat and gCADiso.pat. Well, here we are looking at the first of these. It's acad.pat, and it's simply a text file with the name of each hatch pattern and a series of numbers after them, and a description. So as you move down through the file, it's just an ordinary text file. Some of the patterns get more and more complex, as you see now, roof, shingle patterns and so on. These are just instructions on how, in this case, AutoCAD, which loads and works with these sort of files, as does gCADPlus. It's a description of how the hatch pattern is to be applied. Let's now switch to the second of these, gCADiso.pat, and I want to show you how it's more complex. We've added a lot more hatch patterns to it. These hatch patterns can be found on the internet, and if you have enough patience, you can test them out in the gCADPlus environment and see if they work to your satisfaction. We've selected a few and added them to this pattern file that I'm going to show you now. Well, here we are in the acad.iso.pat file, and you can see it's fairly similar to the one we looked at before. But as we go down through and get towards the end of it, I want to show you that we've added useful and interesting hatch patterns to the file. It's getting really quite long. We've got plastic and stone and one called River Rock. Can you see here? It's really got a lot of instructions on how to fill a space with River Rock pattern, and we're now to a rubble wall. So I don't need to say any more about it, except that if you choose the gCADiso.pat, in a moment when we go back to gCADPlus, you'll have those line types and patterns. Let's minimize it, and we'll go back, and we've picked the hatch command. I'll just go back a little, and we've said let's apply some hatch, and up pops this box. And I hope you now know that it's useful just to choose gCADiso pattern, and when you do that, this hatch box pops up, and if I click on the down arrow, all of those little line types and things that we rubble and river rock and so on are now in this file. If we'd chosen the acad.pat file, they wouldn't be there. So let's choose river rock, and we can select either pick a point inside an entity, but in this case we know we have a closed entity, so we can pick the boundary and hit enter, and we come back here. And at this point our hatch pattern we need to adjust. It's going to be, we get a preliminary look at it, but it's going to be much too dense, so we need to just increase the size of the scale pattern and then apply it, and in goes our patterning. I'll just switch our view to make it a little easier for you to see to a white background. So it's quite easy to change the scale, you might say 200. And this is an arbitrary thing. That scale doesn't mean anything in the real world. It's just a pattern that fits the shape that you're trying to do. Now, if we close that drawing, and we won't save it, and we go back to a brand new drawing, and we say OK, and then we'll just draw this time, say, a rectangle using 2 points, and just plonk a rectangle down, and we go draw hatch, and we pick that rectangle. You can see the file that we're talking about, the gCADiso.pat, is automatically loaded. So it's a once only task when using gCADPlus, is to tell gCADPlus which file pattern, which hatch pattern you are going to use from that point on. So once it's done, it'll be saved in a configuration file, and from that point on gCADPlus will operate with that particular hatch pattern. If you wanted to change the pattern and try one of those patterns that I mentioned are available, just search for AutoCAD hatch patterns. If you wanted to change those, you would go draw and hatch, and up here where it says file, you click on the 3 little dots there, and you could just change at will from one hatch pattern file to another, and pick particular hatch patterns from the file and bring them into your environment. Quite often you'll find that those hatch patterns that you download from the internet, which look interesting, prove to be really difficult and quite unwieldy to work with. So I hope that covers the use of hatch patterns in the gCADPlus environment. This was in response to a user query about which hatch pattern should he choose.